My name is Eliza Morgan, and I have a confession to make. I've spent 26 years of my life pretending to be someone I'm not, someone braver, someone who has it all figured out, someone who doesn't wake up at 3 a.m. with her heart hammering against her rib cage like it's trying to escape. But at midnight, that's when the real me emerges. When the world goes quiet and all that remains are the thoughts I've been running from all day. I met him on the worst day of my life. It was raining, not the gentle kind that makes you want to curl up with a book, the kind that feels like the sky is breaking apart, the kind that mirrors the storm inside you. My mother had just died. Cancer. 6 months of watching her fade until she was just a shadow of the woman who used to dance around our kitchen on Sunday mornings. I was standing outside the hospital, soaked to the bone, unable to cry, unable to move, as if my grief had turned me to stone. And then, there he was, Noah Reed. He didn't offer an umbrella. He didn't say he was sorry for my loss. He just stood there beside me, getting just as wet as I was. Two strangers sharing the same storm. Sometimes, he said after what felt like hours, the world doesn't know how to respond when we're breaking apart, so it breaks apart with us. I looked at him then, really looked at him. Dark hair plastered to his forehead, eyes the color of whiskey, a small scar above his right eyebrow. My dad, he said, answering the question I hadn't asked. 3 years ago. Same floor. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. We ended up at a diner 3 blocks away, the kind with faded leather booths and waitresses who call you honey. We sat across from each other, 2 dripping messes, ordering coffee at 11 p.m. Neither of us mentioned the absurdity of it. I'm Noah, he finally said. Eliza, I replied. It was the first time I'd spoken in hours. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow, like it was coming from somewhere else. Nice to meet you, Eliza, he said, as if we'd just bumped into each other at a party, as if I wasn't sitting there, shattered into a million pieces. That night, we talked until the diner closed, not about my mother or his father, but about everything else. Books we'd read, places we wanted to see, the way the stars looked different in different parts of the world. For a few hours, I forgot that I was grieving. I forgot that I had just lost the most important person in my life. I forgot that I had no idea how to exist in a world without her in it. When we finally left, the rain had stopped. The streets were quiet, that strange, peaceful quiet that only exists in the aftermath of a storm. Can I see you again? He asked. I should have said no. I was in no state to meet someone new, to feel something new. I had a funeral to plan, a life to rebuild, grief to navigate. But instead, I said yes, and that's how it began. Our midnight confessions. We would meet after the rest of the world had gone to sleep, in that diner, at that same booth. 2 insomniacs finding solace in the strangest of places. Slowly, I began to tell him things I'd never told anyone. How sometimes I resented my mother for leaving me. How I was terrified of forgetting the sound of her laugh. How I would sometimes call her phone just to hear her voicemail. And he told me things too, how he blamed himself for not noticing his father's symptoms sooner, how he couldn't bring himself to delete the text messages from their last conversation, how he sometimes drove by his childhood home just to see if it still looked the same. We were 2 broken people, finding the missing pieces of ourselves in each other. But we were careful, so careful, to keep it contained to those midnight hours, as if what we shared was too fragile to exist in the harsh light of day. During the day, I went through the motions. I arranged the funeral. I accepted casseroles from neighbors. I sorted through my mother's belongings, deciding what to keep and what to let go. And at night, I met Noah. It went on like this for weeks. This strange double life, grieving daughter by day, midnight confessor by night, until one night when everything changed. It was raining again, a perfect bookend to how we began. We were leaving the diner, and he took my hand. It was the first time he had touched me, his fingers laced through mine, warm despite the cold night air. "Eliza," he said, his voice barely audible above the sound of the rain. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung between us, eyes heavy as the rain-soaked air, and I panicked, because how could I possibly love someone new? I was still learning how to live with so much loss. How could I give him my heart? When I wasn't even sure it was still intact. So I ran, literally ran, through the rain, away from him, away from the possibility of something that could break me all over again. For 3 days, I didn't go back to the diner. I didn't answer his calls. I buried myself in the safe, familiar routine of grief, the one thing I knew how to do now, until one night, the loneliness felt heavier than the fear, and I found myself walking back to that diner, back to him. He was there, in our booth, as if he knew I would come back, as if he had never doubted it for a second. I slid into the seat across from him, my hands shaking, my heart racing. "I'm sorry," I said. The words felt inadequate, too small for the hurt I must have caused. "Don't be," he replied, his eyes meeting mine, steady, unwavering. "I shouldn't have said that. Not yet. Not when you're still healing." "The thing is," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know if I'll ever be fully healed. I think this grief will always be a part of me now, and I don't know if that's fair to you." He reached across the table, taking my hands in his. "Life isn't fair, Eliza. It wasn't fair when you lost your mom. It wasn't fair when I lost my dad. But maybe, just maybe, it was fair when it brought us together." I felt something crack open inside my chest, something warm and terrifying and real. "I'm not asking you to be ready," he continued. "I'm just asking you not to run away again, because I think we have something here, something worth exploring, something worth being brave for." And that night, instead of confessions, we made promises, not grand, sweeping ones about forever, but small, manageable ones. To be honest, to be patient, to try. For the first time since my mother died, I allowed myself to hope, to believe that maybe my story wasn't ending, that maybe it was just beginning a new chapter. We left the diner, hand in hand. The rain had stopped again, and above us, the clouds had parted to reveal a sky full of stars. "Look," Noah said, pointing upward. "Different stars." I looked up at the vast, endless sky, at all those tiny points of light that had been there all along, just hidden behind the clouds, just waiting to be seen. "Different stars," I agreed, and squeezed his hand. The months that followed weren't easy. Grief doesn't follow a straight line. It loops and circles back on itself. Some days were better than others. Some nights I still woke up gasping for air. Some mornings I still reached for the phone to call my mother, only to remember all over again. But Noah was there, not to fix me, not to erase my pain, but to witness it, to hold my hand through the darkest moments, to remind me that I wasn't alone. And slowly, I began to realize something profound. Love doesn't replace loss. It doesn't fill the void left by someone who's gone. Instead, it creates space for something new, something different, something equally beautiful in its own way. 6 months after we met, Noah took me to the beach. It was midnight, of course, our time. The moon was full, casting silver light across the water. We sat on the sand, listening to the rhythm of the waves, a steady, constant reminder that some things remain unchanged, even when everything else falls apart. "I have a confession to make," Noah said, turning to face me. "Isn't that my line?" I asked, smiling. He laughed, that laugh I had come to love, the one that made the corners of his eyes crinkle, the one that made me feel like maybe joy wasn't such a distant memory after all. "The thing is," he said, suddenly serious, "that day at the hospital, when we met, it wasn't a coincidence." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "I was there, visiting my sister. She's a nurse on the oncology floor. She mentioned you, how you'd been there every day for months, how devoted you were to your mom, how worried she was about you when it was over." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "That day," he continued, "when your mom passed, my sister called me. She said you were standing outside in the rain, that you'd been there for hours, that she was worried about you but couldn't leave her shift. So you came," I whispered, "for a stranger." He nodded. "I came for a stranger, but I stayed for you." I should have felt betrayed, manipulated, but instead, I felt something else entirely, something like wonder, that in my darkest moment, the universe had sent someone to stand with me in the rain. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. At first, it didn't seem important, and then, the longer I waited, the harder it became. I was afraid you'd think what we had wasn't real, that it was based on pity or obligation. He paused, running a hand through his hair. "But it's not, Eliza. What I feel for you, it's the most real thing I've ever known." I looked out at the ocean, at the endless horizon, at all the possibilities stretching before us. "My mom used to say," I began, my voice soft, "that life gives us exactly what we need, exactly when we need it, even if we don't recognize it at the time." I turned back to Noah, to this man who had seen me at my worst, who had listened to my midnight confessions, who had taught me that it was possible to carry both grief and love without one diminishing the other. "I needed you," I said simply, "and somehow you were there." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, his touch as gentle as the night breeze. "And I'll be here," he promised, "for as long as you need me." That night, on the beach, under a canopy of stars, I made one last confession, the most important one of all. "I love you," I whispered, the words no longer frightening, no longer a betrayal of the grief I still carry, but a testament to the heart's capacity to expand, to heal, to begin again. He smiled, that smile that had become my lighthouse, my way back to shore. I love you too, he said. Every broken piece, every midnight confession, all of you. We stayed on that beach until dawn, watching as the darkness gave way to light, as one day ended and another began. It's been 2 years now since that rainy night outside the hospital. 2 years of healing, of learning, of loving. I still miss my mother every day. There are still moments when grief catches me off guard, when the weight of her absence feels too heavy to bear. But I've learned something important, something I wish I could tell that rain-soaked girl from 2 years ago, that grief and love can coexist, that one does not negate the other, that our capacity to feel deeply is both our greatest vulnerability and our greatest strength. Noah and I still meet at midnight sometimes, in that same diner, at that same booth, but our confessions have changed. They're no longer just about what we've lost, but about what we've found, what we've built, what we hope for. My name is Eliza Morgan, and this is my confession. I am still broken, still healing, still learning how to live with loss. But I am also loved and loved, and for the first time in a long time, I am no longer afraid of what comes next, because even in the darkest midnight, there is always the promise of dawn, of new beginnings, of stars we haven't seen yet. And sometimes the most beautiful confessions are the ones we make not to others, but to ourselves, that we are worthy of second chances, that we deserve to be happy, that even after the worst storms, the sun will rise again, and I promise you, it will. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever felt broken and found your way back, or if you're still searching for your own midnight confession, please share this journey with someone who needs to hear it. Your stories matter too. Let me know in the comments about a time when you found light in your darkest moment. Who was your Noah? What was your midnight confession? Every like, every share, every subscription helps me continue creating these stories that connect us all. Stories that remind us we're never truly alone. Hit subscribe to join our growing family of Midnight Confessors, where we transform our pain into something beautiful, one story at a time. Until next time, this is where I leave you, under a sky full of different stars.